You think you understand Prince William, the polished future king with the perfect smile. But the truth is far more complicated and, honestly, a lot more interesting than any headline I've read in years. On July 10th, while his brother Harry was privately reuniting with King Charles and Queen Camilla at Highgrove House, a meeting so fragile that it hadn't happened in 4 years, William was miles away on a polo field charging after a ball in 30-degree heat, and standing on the sidelines was Catherine, Princess of Wales, in a sleeveless gingham dress, bare legs, sparkling eyes, radiating a kind of joy that felt almost defiant. Now, I've covered this family long enough to know that nothing is ever just a coincidence, and the split screen that day was the Monarchy's version of a silent movie with 2 completely different plots running at the same time. One frame shows a long-awaited healing moment behind closed doors with grandchildren who barely know their grandfather. The other frame shows a carefully curated public display of marital strength and physical vitality. That contrast alone is the kind of psychological hook that makes you lean in, because the real question isn't about who attended which event, it's about what exactly changed inside William to make him stand so confidently apart from the chaos, and what his vision for the monarchy actually looks like when the cameras are off. I'll tell you something that caught me off guard. After the match, William and Kate didn't just do the polite cheek kiss routine. They walked hand in hand. They laughed openly. They embraced like 2 people who had just survived something terrible and remembered why they fell in love in the first place. This is not the stiff, choreographed affection of previous generations. Queen Elizabeth II was born in 1926 and raised in a cage of rigid etiquette. But it's also notably different from William and Kate's own earlier public behavior, which was always warm but professionally distant. So what flipped the switch? According to royal biographer Christopher Anderson, it was the year that William himself described as brutal, the hardest of his life, a year when both his wife and his father were diagnosed with cancer within days of each other. A year that pried open every old wound he had been quietly nursing since he was a 15-year-old boy walking behind his mother's coffin through the streets of London. I find it impossible not to feel a pang of empathy when I hear that, because imagine being told your wife's abdominal surgery was a complete success, only for a doctor to return days later and mention the word cancer, and suddenly your entire world contracts into a single terrifying point. Anderson has said that William was floored, unable to fathom how something like this could happen, and considering everything else he has endured, the turbulent, often volatile marriage of his parents, the soul-crushing shock of Princess Diana's passing, the slow disintegration of his bond with Harry, for this to be the hardest period of his life is profoundly revealing. And yet, that crucible didn't destroy him. According to sources close to the family, it cemented his relationship with Catherine even more, giving them both what they now consider a new lease on life, which explains why they seem utterly uninterested in hiding their affection anymore. So the hand-holding at the polo field wasn't just a sweet moment, it was a billboard-sized sign that something deep has shifted in the psychology of the future king, and that's the thread I want to pull, because it connects directly to the most ambitious, almost Robin Hood-like plan to reshape the British monarchy from the inside out. Right now, I want you to hold that image of William's emotional vulnerability next to something that seems completely unrelated, but is actually the cornerstone of his entire strategy: the Duchy of Cornwall. When William inherited the duchy from his father in September 2022, he didn't just get a fancy title and a portfolio of land across 23 counties. He got a private empire that dates back to medieval feudal times, originally designed to fund the life of the Duke of Cornwall, and last year it reportedly provided an income of more than £20 million. The ancient charters are so outdated that a female heir cannot even take over the duchy, which is just one of those dusty institutional oddities that William might eventually address. But what he did almost immediately, after spending 18 months learning the ropes and after a rather testy television documentary exposed how the duchies were charging millions in rent to public service organizations like the army, schools, and charities, was to hire a new chief executive named Will Bax, a property executive who was headhunted for the role and who walked into his interview to find the future king himself sitting in the room. Bax later described the encounter as surprisingly informal, saying William was very human, warm, and engaging, and that they quickly flowed into a conversation about why he wanted the job. That detail alone tells you something about the kind of leader William aspires to be, not someone who hides behind layers of courtiers, but someone who gets directly involved in the structural mechanics of change. And the change he has in mind is audacious. In May of this year, Bax announced that Prince William would be selling off a fifth of the duchy over the next 10 years to invest £500 million into projects aimed at ending homelessness and tackling environmental issues. When I first heard that figure, I admit my immediate reaction was skeptical. The prince with 4 primary homes, castles, and palaces wants to lecture about homelessness? But then you look at the mechanics. Rents were reduced for charity and community tenants, duchy partners that don't align with climate change action, nature decline reversal, sustainable energy, or social need will likely be let go. And William's stated rationale is that the duchy should first and foremost exist to have a positive impact on the world. Bax describes him as relentless in his personal quest and mission, driven by a compassion that enables him to pick up on community challenges in a real and visceral way, and that is, according to his colleagues, quite special in a global leader. So what we're witnessing isn't just a financial restructuring, it's a manifesto for the kind of king William intends to become, one who sells the family silver not because he has to, but because he genuinely believes the institution must serve the public or risk becoming irrelevant. Now, I can sense the skepticism out there, because I felt it too, but here's where the dopamine hit of insight connects the emotional trauma to the policy ambition. William's commitment to homelessness didn't start with some PR brainstorming session. It started when he was a small boy and his mother, Princess Diana, took him to visit The Passage, a homeless charity in Westminster. That childhood imprint later led him to become patron of Centrepoint, another homeless charity, and eventually to launch Homewards, a 5-year program now operating in 6 flagship UK locations to create a blueprint for ending homelessness. Michael Corbishley, the head of local delivery for Homewards, has said that William's genuine passion and his strong desire to drive change really come across, and that anyone who meets him is convinced. But beyond the warm words, the practical evidence is in the partners he has persuaded to jump on board: furniture companies, banks, local councils, employers, schools, builders, all betting on a prince's vision. William himself has admitted it's a big task, but he's adamant that homelessness is not an individual failure, it's a systemic failure. And if systems helped create the problem, systems can help prevent it. That line is so surprisingly blunt and policy-focused that it almost sounds like a politician's stump speech, and yet it's coming from a hereditary heir who could easily just smile and wave. In parallel, his Earthshot Prize, founded in 2020, pours millions into solutions that repair the planet by 2030, with a glittering cast of ambassadors that includes Kate Blanchett, Robert Irwin, and former New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern. The 2026 ceremony is heading to Mumbai later this year, and William has said that when the winners win, we all win. All of this, when you stack it together, starts to look less like traditional royal duty and more like a calculated, emotionally informed mission to heal the very systems that cause suffering. And the source of that mission may well be the little boy who walked behind a coffin and later sat in a helicopter witnessing trauma that made him feel death was just around the corner. I personally think that connection is what makes William's quest authentic, not because he's a saint, but because his pain has forced him to find purpose, and that's a human story that transcends the palace walls. But let's bring the tone back down to the messy reality of royal politics, because for all the shiny initiatives, William is also operating in the shadow of an institution that keeps catching fire. The scandal surrounding his uncle, Prince Andrew, has been a relentless drip feed of reputational damage, and according to royal author Andrew Lowney, whose meticulously researched book laid out the extent of Andrew's behavior, William would have preferred the firm to move far more decisively. Lowney claims that if William had been in charge, he would have cut the York family off sooner and more ruthlessly, and that William cannot stand Andrew personally, seeing the huge damage done and wanting his father to clear up the mess rather than pass on the problem to him, just as the late Queen passed it to Charles. Christopher Anderson echoes that sentiment, stating that the monarchy is in crisis because of Andrew's involvement in the scandal linked to the convicted financier Jeffrey Epstein, and that nobody understands that better than Catherine, who was reportedly the first royal to turn her back on Andrew and the first to refuse to speak to him even at private family functions, even banning him from her annual Christmas concert at Westminster Abbey. It is alleged, and I must stress that these are accounts from royal biographers and not officially confirmed palace statements, that both William and Kate were vocal to the king about wanting Andrew banished from royal life and stripped of his title, because the Princess of Wales does not want her husband and ultimately her son George inheriting a tarnished crown. In February 2026, Andrew was arrested by Thames Valley Police on suspicion of misconduct in public office, and the investigation is still ongoing, with further documents from the Epstein files continuing to emerge and provoke uncomfortable questions. This legal and moral morass creates a fascinating tension. William wants to build a legacy of compassion and systemic change, yet he is simultaneously part of a family apparatus that has to manage the fallout from one of its own members. How he navigates that will define not just his reign, but the very survival of the monarchy's brand, especially in Commonwealth realms where patience is running thin. Barbados already removed the Queen as head of state in 2021, Jamaica is drafting legislation for a potential referendum, and even in Australia and the UK, public sentiment can shift fast. Lowney suggests that while a domestic republic is unlikely in Britain, the monarchy is increasingly seen as irrelevant, which paradoxically provides William an opportunity to make it fit for purpose in the 21st century and win back trust. I want to pause here and offer you a slightly cheeky observation, because if you look at William's communication strategy, it's almost as if he's systematically dismantling the old royal mystique brick by brick and replacing it with a highly relatable, algorithm-friendly version of royalty. His appearance on TikTok as the self-described beautiful assistant to science influencer Big Manny performing an experiment on a strawberry in 2025 broke new ground in royal history. I mean, can you imagine Queen Elizabeth II doing that? The Kensington Palace social media team has been expertly recruiting specialists to produce slick video content that speaks directly to a younger audience, gradually diluting the power of the Royal Rota, the accredited group of legacy correspondents who have long controlled the narrative. William's preference for chatting over a pint at his local Windsor pub, the Two Brewers, with actor Eugene Levy for a television interview, or dropping in with NFL stars Jason and Travis Kelce to talk World Cup football, is not accidental. It's a deliberate humanization strategy, and it extends to his lifelong Aston Villa fandom, a team with a proud working-class heritage in Birmingham, which he chose specifically because he didn't want to follow run-of-the-mill teams and craved the emotional roller coaster. That anecdote from a 2015 BBC Sport interview where he described sitting with Brummy fans in his red beanie at Wembley is the kind of detail that makes you involuntarily like him a little more, even if you're a staunch Republican. And when Villa won the Europa League in May this year, William was filmed ecstatically celebrating with fans in Turkey, looking utterly unguarded. I find this blend of careful choreography and genuine enthusiasm fascinating because it raises a core question. Can a future king be both a man of the people and the apex of an inherited hierarchy? The answer seems to be evolving in real time, and William's bet appears to be that authenticity, even if partially constructed, beats detachment every time. Now, let's loop back to Catherine, because no analysis of William's plan is complete without acknowledging that she is widely regarded as the monarchy's ultimate trump card. Anderson, in his new biography, calls her the world's #1 practitioner of soft power, describing how world leaders from China, France, and the United States apparently act like smitten schoolboys when she is strategically seated next to them at state banquets. That's an enormous diplomatic asset, but the real kicker is the irony Anderson points out. Unlike Diana, who came from one of England's oldest aristocratic families, Kate is the descendant of coal miners, and her mother was a flight attendant. The fact that someone from such a modest background might end up being the savior of Britain's monarchy is the kind of delicious plot twist that a scriptwriter would reject as too on the nose. And yet, her quiet retreat from public life to focus on her cancer treatment, shielding her 3 young children from undue worry, and her re-emergence at that polo match looking radiant has cemented a public sympathy that money cannot buy. William, who Anderson describes as always more emotionally fragile than Kate, has leaned on that strength, and together they have formed what appears to be a genuinely fortified unit. The couple's insistence on protecting their close-knit family from the toxicity that has swirled around the wider royal household is reportedly one reason they have kept a chilly distance from the Sussex homecoming drama. While the king was finally seeing his American grandchildren after 4 long years, William was purposefully elsewhere, and that decision, according to multiple sources, was not just about scheduling, it was a boundary. Whether that boundary ever softens is one of the great unanswered questions hanging over this era, and I suspect it will be a slow-burn storyline that keeps royal watchers speculating for years. As we near the final stretch, I want to plant one more compelling hook that ties the entire narrative together. William has openly discussed the psychic trauma he suffered after his mother's passing, the emotional scars from that public funeral procession, and the startling fact that he was never offered any counseling. He still deals with mental health symptoms that mental health professionals would recognize as post-traumatic stress, and he told the BBC that his years as an air ambulance pilot, exposed to such high levels of sadness and loss, created a very negative feeling where he thought death was just around the corner. This is not a prince who simply woke up one day and decided to sell land and launch homelessness projects. This is a man whose own mental health journey has, by his own admission, shaped a vision where compassion is not a soft virtue but a structural necessity. When he says he wants to create a world in which his son is proud of what they do, it's not empty paternal sentiment. It's a declaration that the cycle of stiff upper lip suffering stops with him. The future king, who will one day occupy a throne that some polls suggest is losing relevance, is betting everything on the idea that genuine service, funded by audacious financial moves and communicated with modern intimacy, can renew the contract between the crown and the public. I cannot help but respect the sheer scale of that ambition, even as I keep a healthy dose of journalistic skepticism in my back pocket. The monarchy may be an anachronism to many, but watching William attempt to retrofit it for a century that desperately needs leadership with empathy is, in my opinion, one of the most unexpectedly gripping stories of our time. So the next time you see a photograph of him holding Kate's hand or cheering at a football match, remember that behind that image is a brutal year, a £500 million gamble on homelessness, a childhood shaped by unimaginable grief, and a calculated plan to redefine what it means to wear the crown. That's not just a news cycle, that's a legacy under construction, and whether it succeeds or crumbles will depend on how consistently the man inside the royal machinery can turn his private healing into public good.